The lost years. The Book of Acts is the primary historical record of the early Christian church. It spans roughly 3 decades of history, tracking the explosive growth of a new faith across the ancient world. But as a historical document, it ends with a sudden and frustrating silence. The text concludes with the Apostle Paul under house arrest in Rome around the year 62. After that, the biblical narrative simply stops. We have 12 men who changed the course of human history. Yet the primary document of their faith goes completely silent on almost all of them. So what actually happened to the original apostles after the New Testament record ends? By examining the final biblical texts and the earliest surviving historical manuscripts, we can begin to separate what is documented from what is later legend. When we look strictly at the canonical text, the evidence is remarkably sparse. The New Testament documents the death of only one of the original 12 apostles. In the 12th chapter of Acts, the text briefly states that King Herod Agrippa had James, the brother of John, put to death with the sword. This execution occurred in Jerusalem around the year 44. Beyond that single event, the Bible provides no definitive conclusion to the lives of Peter, John, Thomas, Matthew, or the others. The abrupt ending of the Book of Acts has puzzled historians for centuries. Why did the author, traditionally identified as Luke, stop writing right before the most critical moments of the early church? One hypothesis suggests that Luke simply wrote up to the present moment, meaning the book was published while Paul was still awaiting trial in Rome. Another possibility is that a 3rd volume was planned but never written, or perhaps it was lost to history. Whatever the reason, this textual sudden stop created a massive historical blind spot. To find clues about their final days, researchers have to look closely at the letters, or epistles, written near the end of the 1st century. In the document known as 2 Peter, the author speaks of his approaching death, noting that the laying aside of his earthly tent is imminent. In Paul's final letter to Timothy, he writes that his departure has come, and that he has finished the race. But these documents only tell us that they expected to die. They do not tell us how, when, or where it happened. To find concrete answers, we have to step outside the Bible and examine the earliest extra-biblical documents. The most crucial piece of evidence from this period is a manuscript known as 1 Clement. This letter was written by a leader of the church in Rome, directly addressing the Christian community in Corinth. Historians generally date this document to the year 96, just 3 decades after the Book of Acts ends. 1 Clement is incredibly valuable because it is the earliest surviving historical document outside the New Testament to mention the fates of Peter and Paul. Clement writes that because of unjust jealousy, Peter endured not 1 or 2, but numerous labors, and having suffered martyrdom, departed to the place of glory. He then describes Paul suffering a similar fate, bearing chains, and eventually being removed from the world. This ancient letter confirms what the biblical texts only hinted at. It provides solid, 1st century documentary evidence that the 2 most prominent leaders of the early church were executed. But there is a glaring limitation to Clement's letter. While it confirms the martyrdom of Peter and Paul, it says absolutely nothing about the other 10 original apostles. This lack of primary evidence created a massive void. The early Christian communities wanted to know what happened to their founders. Where did Thomas preach? How did Matthew die? What happened to Bartholomew? Because the original documents provided no answers, the 2nd and 3rd centuries saw an explosion of new texts. These apocryphal accounts were filled with spectacular miracles, exotic travels, and dramatic executions. But distinguishing the historical reality from these later, highly embellished traditions requires careful investigation. The true mystery of the apostles is not just how they died, but how their scattered missions gave rise to legends that would permanently shape the Christian world. Continuo para a proxima parte dois. The scattered missions of the remaining apostles left a historical void that was quickly filled by traditions, legends, and local memories. The destiny of the Apostle John presents one of the most fascinating historical puzzles of this era. Unlike his brother James, whose execution is explicitly recorded in the biblical text, John completely vanishes from the later chapters of Acts. According to a strong tradition that emerged in the late 2nd century, John eventually relocated to the city of Ephesus in Asia Minor. The early church historian Irenaeus, writing around the year 180, claimed that John lived until the reign of the Roman Emperor Trajan. If this historical claim is accurate, it means John survived into the late 90s of the 1st century, making him the only original apostle to die of natural causes. Tradition also places him on the desolate island of Patmos, connecting his final years to the apocalyptic visions found in the book of Revelation. Yet even this peaceful end is surrounded by competing legends, including a 3rd century account suggesting he was thrown into a basin of boiling oil in Rome, but miraculously survived. While John supposedly remained within the familiar borders of the Roman Empire, the traditions surrounding another apostle point to a journey far beyond the Mediterranean world. The story of Thomas, widely known as the doubting disciple, is perhaps the most globally expansive of all apostolic traditions. According to a 3rd century apocryphal text known as the Acts of Thomas, he was reluctant to travel, but was ultimately sold as a slave and sent to India to work as an architect for an Indian king. For centuries, Western historians dismissed this account as pure pious fiction. But historical and archaeological research has revealed a very different perspective. 1st century trade routes between the Roman Empire and the southern coast of India were heavily established and frequently used. Ships regularly sailed from Egypt across the Arabian Sea, making a journey to India completely plausible for a 1st century traveler. Furthermore, a vibrant religious community known as the St. Thomas Christians has existed in the Indian state of Kerala for well over 1,000 years. They fiercely maintain the tradition that Thomas founded their church in the year 52 before being martyred with a spear. The historical footprint of the other apostles is much harder to verify. The apostle Andrew, brother to Peter, is traditionally linked to Greece and the regions surrounding the Black Sea. The widely recognized symbol of the X-shaped cross, known as a saltire, is directly tied to the legend of Andrew's execution. However, the earliest surviving text that describes this specific method of crucifixion dates to the Middle Ages. Centuries after the supposed event, the fate of the Apostle Philip presents another historical complication. Ancient traditions eventually placed his death in the city of Hierapolis, located in modern Turkey. Remarkably, in the year 2011, archaeologists excavating Hierapolis discovered a 1st century Roman tomb that matches the exact location where ancient Christians venerated Philip. While it does not prove exactly how he died, it strongly confirms that the early traditions were grounded in real geographic locations, not just theological imagination. To understand why these elaborate stories developed, we have to look closely at the cultural environment of the 2nd and 3rd centuries. During this chaotic period, the Christian Church was facing intermittent but severe persecution from Roman authorities. The early believers desperately needed heroes. They needed examples of ultimate faith in the face of brutal execution. This urgent cultural need gave rise to a new genre of literature known as the Apocryphal Acts. Consider the most famous tradition regarding the Apostle Peter. Most people are familiar with the story that Peter was crucified upside down. This dramatic detail does not appear in the biblical text, nor is it found in the earliest letter from Clement. It first surfaces in the Apocryphal Acts of Peter, a highly stylized document from the late 2nd century. According to this text, Peter requested the inverted position because he felt unworthy to die in the exact same manner as Jesus. Did this profound act of humility actually happen, or was it a theological invention created a century later to emphasize Peter's devotion? Historians remain sharply divided. It is easy for a modern researcher to dismiss these apocryphal texts as entirely fabricated, but completely rejecting them might be a mistake. Many scholars argue that while the magical elements and lengthy speeches are clearly invented, the geographic destinations and the general manner of death might contain a powerful core of historical memory. Continuo para approxima parte tres. That core of historical memory becomes especially important when we examine the most obscure members of the original 12. While figures like Peter and John dominated the early Christian landscape, the rest of the apostles essentially vanished into the shadows of history. Consider the apostle Bartholomew. According to a widespread tradition that gained popularity in the centuries following his death, Bartholomew traveled as far as Armenia to preach the new faith. The legends surrounding his end are some of the most gruesome in Christian history, claiming he was flayed alive before being beheaded. This terrifying execution method became his defining symbol. If you look at Michelangelo's famous painting of the Last Judgment in the Sistine Chapel, Bartholomew is depicted holding his own skin. But when historians search for 1st century documentation to verify this event, they find absolute silence. The earliest written accounts of his martyrdom in Armenia do not appear until hundreds of years later, making it impossible to confirm how much of the story is historical fact and how much is regional legend designed to give the Armenian Church an apostolic founder. A similar problem surrounds the Apostle Matthew. Tradition closely associates him with the first gospel, but his life after the events of the New Testament is a complex web of conflicting stories. Some ancient writers claimed that Matthew traveled to Ethiopia to establish a church. Other early traditions placed him in Parthia, located in modern Iran. Even the accounts of his death cannot agree. While some later texts describe him being killed with a halberd or a sword, one of the earliest theologians, Clement of Alexandria, suggested that Matthew actually died a natural death. When ancient sources contradict each other this directly, historians must classify his final fate as unknown. The disappearance of Matthias is perhaps the most striking of all. He was chosen in the first chapter of Acts to replace Judas Iscariot, restoring the total number of apostles to 12. Yet the moment he is elected, he is never mentioned again in the canonical texts. Later traditions vaguely assigned him to regions like Cappadocia or the coasts of the Caspian Sea, but no reliable early manuscript verifies his journey or his eventual martyrdom. This pattern of profound silence forces us to ask a crucial question. If these men were the foundational pillars of Christianity, why did the authors of the New Testament completely ignore their final years? The answer lies in understanding the true purpose of the ancient texts. Modern readers often approach the book of Acts expecting a comprehensive biography of the apostles. But the author, traditionally understood to be Luke, was not writing a biographical encyclopedia. He was writing a theological history of the early church. The narrative focus is not on the men themselves, but on the message they carried. Once an apostle's role in pushing the geographical boundaries of the faith was established, the biblical text simply moved on. The individuals were secondary to the expansion of the movement. By the 2nd and 3rd centuries, however, the cultural priorities of the Christian world began to shift. As the church grew into a vast institution, local communities desperately wanted a direct connection to the original founders. Claiming that an apostle lived, preached, or died in your city provided immense theological and political authority. Rome claimed Peter and Paul. Ephesus claimed John. India claimed Thomas. The physical remains of the martyrs, known as relics, became the literal foundations for massive basilicas. The historical men were slowly transformed into monumental symbols of the faith. When we strip away the centuries of medieval art, golden legends, and later political motivations, the historical reality is remarkably grounded. What we can say with confidence is that James was executed by a regional king, and Peter and Paul were martyred by the Roman Empire. We know that John likely lived a long life, and that the rest of the original group scattered across the ancient world. We may never possess the first-century documents needed to trace the final footsteps of Matthew, Bartholomew, or Matthias. But perhaps the true historical mystery is not how these ancient men died, but what they managed to accomplish while they lived. Without modern communication, wealth, or political power, this small group of provincial workers successfully transmitted a belief system that ultimately outlasted the Roman Empire itself. Their individual graves may be lost to time, but their collective historical footprint permanently altered the world. If you would like our next investigation to examine the mysterious author of the Book of Revelation and his visions on the island of Patmos, leave the word Patmos in the comments.